And now we're up to Daf Yudalid Omid Beis. Now on Omid Aleph we had brought a brisa that said the words Lo Omar Klum, which indicated that the neder is not chal at all, and yet that language really has to be interpreted in two different ways. With regard to a Talmud Chacham, Eino Chinami, we take it straightforward. Lo Omar Klum, he doesn't need HaTorah. But in the case of an Amma Aretz, in that exact scenario, he would require She'elas Chacham to be mated in neder on a Drabanan level, even though the language is Lo Omar Klum. So that brisa now is being brought down here on Amid Beis and studied more in depth. Tanya, Hanoder Batorah, Lo Omar Klum. He took a shvu, as we said before, on the Torah that he wouldn't do so and so, or he would do so and so. That's a lashon shvu. And he said, "Bizos haTorah she'esed dover ploni," or "Shelo esed dover ploni." Bizos haTorah. Lo Omar Klum. Shvu is not chal, and he's not chayiv to be mekayim that shvu, because we evaluate his das and we assume that he meant to be nishba b'kedushas hagvilin haklaf shel haTorah, shel sefer Torah, and that's not a valid language of shvua, because we say a shvua needs haskar shem. Now, the Ran at the beginning of the Masechet, the Dibra Maskal Ushvuos, and many other Rishonim say the shvua doesn't need haskar shem. But they don't mean that a shvua doesn't need haskar shem. They mean, in general, stam, a kavana of a nishba is to be nishba b'shem. So you don't have to explicitly say the word God's name. I swear in the name of God, right? But in a case of nishba b'Torah, and his kavana, his das, was on the gvilin sheba, so he's like the case of nishba b'shamayim va'aretz, which in one shvuas lamed hey we mentioned earlier, is not a shvuah. So he doesn't allow us to interpret that his intention was for the Shem Hashem, to be Nishba B'Shem. So even though these Rishonim, the head of that group is the Ran, maintain you don't have to actually explicitly enunciate the name of God in the Shvu. Shvu is valid without that. That's because we assume he had in mind Shvu B'Shem. But in the case where he's Nishba on the Gvilin of the Sefer Torah, we don't have the luxury of assuming that he meant to be Nishba B'Shem. Now the brisa continues. If he says B'Meshe Kosev Ba, I swear in that which is written in the Torah that I'll do such, or I won't do such, and such. Then we assume and we evaluate his das that when he said the words B'Meshe Kosev Ba, he meant the askaros that are written in the Sefer Torah. So now he's Nishba B'Shem. We can fill in his kavana and assume that Echinami is being Nishba B'Shem. Now the Bryce has a third scenario. Ba uba meshe kosev ba dvarim kayomin. Dvarim kayomin means the neder is chal and it's valid, even though his das is for two things. He wants to take the shvu on the kedushas hagvilin, and also with the askaros Hashem. And we'll see that the Gemara is baffled as to why the Brisa felt compelled to add this case, since he said B'Meshe Kosev Ba, so he was Nishba B'Shem. The Gemara doesn't assume that because he added the word Ba as a reference to Kedushas HaGvilin, that should undermine the Shvur, because he was Nishba B'Shem insofar as he added the words B'Meshe Kosev Ba. So that's the Gemara's kasha. Now, Ktani, since we already have in the Brisa that if he says B'Meshe Kosev Ba, he refers to the Askaros, and Dvar Kayom, and therefore it's like Nishba B'Shem, and the Shvu is valid. Then if you add the word Ba U'B'Meshe Kosev Ba, Tzarech L'Meimar, did the Brisa feel compelled to tell me the din? I mean, since he did say B'Meshe Kosev Ba, he's referring to the Askaros, that's a Shvu B'Shem. And once again, the Gemara doesn't assume that because he said Ba, that's going to undermine and invalidate the Shvur. So why did the Brisa feel compelled to tell me that Ba, Uba Meshe Kosev Ba, is a valid neder? It would seem to be totally obvious. And the Gemara answers a number of answers, the first of which is Rav Nachman, Omer Rav Nachman Lokash. You should not raise this question, this difficulty as to why the Tana of the Brisa felt compelled to teach me that sefer. And the truth is because the Brisa is talking about two different scenarios. And now the Gemara is going to differentiate between the case where he's holding on to the Sefer Torah as opposed to the case where the Sefer Torah is Murach Lefana. Ha de Machata Oraisa Ara. The Sefer, the Brisa, which says that because he said Ba, Uba Mesha Kasu Ba, the Shvua is valid verb Kayomin. That's a case where the Torah is not being held in his arms, but rather it's Munachas ala Oretz. And again, it doesn't mean that Dafka it has to be Munachas ala Oretz, but it means that it's not in his hands. He's not holding on to it. The Gemara is going to explain why in a minute. But for Ha, the ratio of the Brisa, that even if he leaves out Ba, and he only says Bamesha Kasu Ba, and the Shvu is valid, that's Ha did not get Lebiod, he's holding on to the Sefer Torah. That's the scenario. He's Maksik as a Sefer Torah Biyod. The Gemara explains. So again, just to summarize, the Gemara is saying that in the case of the Sefer, namely Ba, Uba Mesha Kasu Ba, the Sefer Torah is not in his arms. In the case of Ba Mesha Kasu Ba, he's holding on to the Sefer Torah. So now the Gemara explains. Machtal Ara, when the Torah is not in his arms, it's on the ground, so to speak, it's on a table, I don't know where it is. And he says, he declares, Bameshek Kasu Ba, Daite Agvile. We have reason to believe that his das is on the Gvil, the Kdush Sakla, and not on the Shemos HaKadoshi. So that's the case where we need Ba, and then Bamesha Kasu Ba. Why do we need Ba? Ba is going to tell me that in Chinami, he's not holding on to the Sefer Torah, and he is, with the word Ba, indicating that he wants to take the Shvuah on the Kedusha Gvila. So why did he add Bamesha Kasu Ba? The only justification for his adding these words, which seem redundant of Bamesha Kasu Ba, could only be that he wants to add the Askaros. So again, because he's not holding on to the Sefer Torah, we assume that when he says Ba, he means in the Gvila. And therefore we have to have both Ba and Bamesha Kasu Ba, so we now know that Bamesha Kasu Ba is a reference to the Askaros. However, Nakat Lebiyado, if he's holding on to the Sefer Torah, then we don't need the Ba. We don't need that meticulous analysis and a diuk in his double language, etc. Just he says Bamesha Kasu Ba, is then we evaluate that Daito, his mind, his intention is al Azkara Sheba, on the Shemos HaKadoshim that are written in the Sefer Torah. Because if he's holding on to the Sefer Torah, then he should have, had we assumed that he's being Nishma and Kedusha Saklaf, he should have said Ba. Right? He's holding on to the Sefer Torah. He should have said Ba. Ba meaning what I'm holding on to. So therefore, in the case where he's holding on to the Sefer Torah himself, even though he didn't add the word Ba, we assume that Bamesha Kasu Ba is a reference to the Azkaros, because once again, the logic is, in the case where he's holding on to the Sefer Torah, if he wanted to mention that his Shvur should be Chal and generated by the Kedusha Klaf, then he should have said Ba. He's holding on to the Sefer Torah. Ba would mean in this Sefer Torah that I'm holding on to. But in the case of Munachas Alakaki, he's not holding on to it. Then the absence of the word Ba doesn't prove anything. So he writes here, Kishimunachas ala karka, ein lo chiach mimashalo omar ba shedaitu alas karos. So when the Brisa says in the Sefer that only what he says ba uva meshe kosev ba, then dvar kayomin, but meshe kosev ba is not dvar kayomin. That's the case with the Sefer Torah is munachas ala karka. So in the absence of the word ba, we don't have a proof that he means the azkaros. Iboy say, but now the Gemara offers an alternative interpretation of the Brisa, and that is the Machta al Ara. The Torah is not in his arms. The Hakamash Malon, and the Chiddush of the Brisa is the Apal Gav the Machta al Ara. Even though he's not holding on to the Sefer Torah, nevertheless came with the Yomar B'Meshe Kosev Ba Mahani. The language of Meshe Kosev Ba indicates that he wants to take a shvur. He doesn't have to add the word ba according to this Ibois Emo. We're going to interpret by Meshe Kosev Ba that he had kavanah of the shemus, and that's the extra chiddush. Now we have to read the Brisa with the principle of zuvein tzarchom v'zu, because you asked me why did the Brisa in the Sefer have to mention ba uba Meshe Kosev Ba. And the answer is that the Tana organizes it in a way, in a method of Zuvein Tzarchol and Zu. First, the Tana gives us the bigger Chiddush, that even if he didn't say the word Ba, and he's not holding on to the Sefer Torah, nevertheless, we assume he means B'Meshe Kosev Ba in the Azkaros, and that's a valid Shvur B'Shem. And it goes without saying, the Brisa says that if he says B'Meh Shekosev Ba, I mean, ba uba meshe kosev ba, certainly, without doubt, he has in mind the Azkaros, because the logic and the diuk that we mentioned before, ba means the gvilin, and ba meshe kosev ba is the Azkaros. Ibois ema. Now the Gemara offers a third possibility in interpreting this by Kula mitzi asa nami to nokit le biyodin. So it means from the entire Brisa, from the middle part of the Brisa, the last two bubbles of the Brisa, we're talking about a case of someone who's holding on to the Sefer Torah in his arms. The Gemara said, so why did we need the Sefer of Ba Uba Meshe Kosev Ba Dvarim Kayomim? And the answer is that the Tana is not intending to tell me that he said both Ba and Ba Meshe Kosev Ba, that he recited and enunciated both. But rather, Hakamash Malan came in the Nokat Le Biyode, Afagav Lomar Ba, Kimandi Omar Bameh Shekosev Ba Dam. So it means that since he's holding on to the Sefer Torah, and that's what we said, the last two bavas of the Brisa, according to this third interpretation, are referring to Nokat Le Biyode. Therefore, even though he didn't say ba and just ba, which would have indicated that he wants the azkaros because he's holding on to the sefer, but Kimandi Omar B'Meshe Kosev Ba Dam. That when he says B'Meshe Kosev Ba, his das is to be nishva on the Shemos HaKadoshim, and therefore the Shvu is Chal. Now, the next couple of Mishnayos that we're going to learn are going to distinguish between Neder and Shvu. The first distinction we're going to see here in this Mishnah, and then in the next Mishnah on Tesvav, we'll have another distinction. So a man declares in our Mishnah, Shkonam Shani Yoshen. He prohibits on himself Shena bin Neder Kikarbon, Kona meaning a carbon. Or he says, Kona Shani Medaber, that he prohibits himself from dibur like a carbon, or he says konam shani mahalik, and he prohibits halicha as a korban. Or a husband who says ha'omer isha, he says to his wife, konam shani mishamshik. The attachment should be also alike in korban. Harei zeh, in all these cases, the neder is chal, and below yachal baro, if he violates the neder, then he's chayav for violating bal yachal baro. Now, this is a bit strange because the word sha'ani is mashma mashani yoshen should be a konam. Sha'ani. And the Ran goes out of his way to say that there's another girsa that's incorrect, she'eni. Because if he says she'eni and he prohibits himself sheni yoshen, that's a lashon shmua. That would not be a valid neder. Itmar, we learned amongst the Amoron that konam eni b'shina hayom im isha l'mochor. We have now machlokas Amoron about a case where a person prohibits on himself in a neder that he won't sleep today, and he adds a condition if he sleeps tomorrow. So only if he sleeps tomorrow will we have a birur that what he took upon himself today was a valid neder that asses himself in shena of today. So we'll only know Mafreya if he violated Bal Yachel when he slept today, and we'll only know that if he sleeps tomorrow. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Al Yishan Hayom, B'Rabbanan, he's not allowed to sleep today because of the Chashashem Yishan L'Macha. He'll also sleep tomorrow. And then we'll have a Biru L'Mafreya that the neder of today was Chal, and when he slept today, he violated Bal Yachel. So even though the Chalos HaNeder depends upon the Kiyum Tnai, namely that he sleeps tomorrow, nevertheless he cannot sleep today. Why? Because the sleeping of tomorrow is not the Ikar Neder, that's only the Tnai of the Neder. And a person with regard to a Tnai is not so careful. He's more careful with the Gufa Isur. So therefore we have to be choshish that he might sleep tomorrow, hence he cannot sleep today. Rav Nachman Omar, Yishana Yom. We don't have to worry about this. There's no chashash that he'll sleep tomorrow. Let him sleep today till Zayin Gesund and start. We're not being choshish that he'll violate his neder l'mafreya by sleeping tomorrow. It's biyado. Adover totally biyado. He can be careful about himself, put himself on pins and needles and make sure he doesn't fall asleep. And therefore, he won't violate the neder l'mafreya by sleeping tomorrow. However, Moder of Yehuda, Rav Yehuda was the one who was machmir here, correct? Omer Rav Yehuda Marav. The Omer konam eni b'shena lemachar ishanayom sheishanayom. If on the other hand he takes an isa neder that tomorrow he won't sleep, if he sleeps today, then in that case, he made a t'nai on Shena today, Yishan Hayom. He's allowed to sleep today. And we're not afraid that tomorrow he might also sleep and violate his neder, because tomorrow is the Gufa Neder. And on a Gufa Neder, he'll be very careful. And that's how the Gemara formulates the principle here of Rav Yehuda. Kilo mizdayer bitna, will be surah mizdayer. When there's a shash that he might sleep and violate his neder, that's when the sleeping is only a t'nai for the Isser. It's not the Iker Gufa Isser. And therefore, when he says, Konam eni l'lai b'shena yom evisha l'macha, Rav Yehuda holds he's not allowed to sleep today because we're afraid that tomorrow he'll sleep, because tomorrow is only the Kiyama t'nai. He's not so careful about it. And therefore, if he sleeps today, he'll violate Lamafreya, Bal Yachid. I will be Surah Mizdayah. He'll be careful about sleeping when that is the Iker Guf HaIsur Neder. That'll be careful about. Stam Adam Nizar. Therefore, if he says Konim Eni Beshina Lemachar Eishan Ayom, Rabbi Yehuda concedes that he's allowed to sleep today. We're not being cautious that tomorrow will sleep because that's already the Gufa Neder, and we assume that he'll be Nizar the Gufa Neder. So this is where we're going to stop for today. Let's just make a note of it, and we're up to Tanan here on the top of Tesvav and Aleph. Have a great day.